On my 68th birthday, in our old seaside home in Charleston, my husband Jared walked into the room with a woman I had never seen and two nearly grown boys standing stiffly beside her. He placed a trembling hand on my shoulder and announced to our guests, "This is my other family, the one I've kept secret for 30 years, my daughters, Lena and Clara." Froze where they stood. Lena's wine glass slipped from her fingers, and Clara's hand flew to her mouth as if she were holding in a scream. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that sinks straight into the floorboards. You could hear nothing but the waves outside brushing against the marsh grass. But me, I simply smiled. I reached for the small wooden box I had kept under the corner of the buffet table all afternoon. I handed it to Jared calmly, as if I had been expecting this moment, and truthfully, I had. "I know," I told him softly. "This is for you." His face drained of color as he lifted the lid. His fingers twitched. A hush rippled across the guests, a slow collective inhale. Before I continue, I would be grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel, tap the like button, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I always love to know the places my stories reach. Now, let's begin. That morning had started like any other coastal dawn, light salt in the air, the soft hum of boats heading out before sunrise, and the first glow touching the tops of the palmettos outside my kitchen window. I woke up without an alarm, exactly at 5:45, as I always do. The porch smelled faintly of jasmine vines warming in the early sun. I remember setting the birthday table alone, smoothing the linen cloth I bought years ago in Savannah, arranging hydrangeas from my garden. I remember thinking how peaceful the house felt. I had no idea it would be the last peaceful morning of my marriage. The morning light lied to me that day. Charleston has a way of waking up gently, as if the whole city breathes in unison before it opens its eyes. That birthday morning, the world outside my window felt impossibly calm. The sky was washed in that pale gold color I've loved since childhood, and the tide was low enough that I could see the oysters clinging to the muddy banks behind our house. I woke, as I always do, a few minutes before 6. No alarm, no rush, just a steady rhythm my body has kept for decades. My feet found the cool wooden floorboards, and I padded to the kitchen where the smell of chicory coffee drifted from the French press I set up the night before. The kettle clicked softly, steam rising like a whispered promise. Everything felt right. Everything was lying. I stepped out onto the back porch and let the early breeze brush against my face. The jasmine vines along the railings had exploded overnight, their scent sweet and almost overwhelming. The marsh grass swayed, soft and lazy, the way it only does before the heat settles in. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let myself believe this day would be like the others, quiet, predictable, harmless. Inside, I set the table with the blue and white linens I saved for special occasions. I smoothed each crease carefully, the way my mother taught me, and arranged a bowl of fresh peaches in the center. I told myself it was for the guests, but truthfully, it was for me. I needed beauty that morning, even if I didn't know why. Lena had texted a quick "Happy birthday, Mom" before rushing into a meeting. Clara sent a voice note promising she'd be by later with pastries. Their voices always warmed me, even when they were hurried. As I folded the napkins, a tiny ache tugged at me, an old ache, familiar and dull. A feeling I had learned to ignore. A warning I had silenced for years. The sun kept rising. The light kept lying. By late morning, the house was already humming with the small, familiar tasks of hosting, tasks I had repeated for so many years they felt stitched into my bones. I moved from counter to stove to table in a rhythm that didn't need thought. Slicing tomatoes for the caprese platter, brushing butter over cornbread, checking the roast in the oven every half hour. The kitchen windows fogged gently, warm with the smell of rosemary and garlic. It should have felt festive. It only felt expected. I arranged the silverware in their neat little rows, placing each fork with a precision that made me wonder who I was doing all this for. Guests would arrive smiling, hands full of wine and flowers. They would hug me, compliment the food, ask about the garden. They would call it a celebration, but for years, it felt more like a performance. Jared wandered through the kitchen only once on his way to the garage. He didn't comment on the decorations or the new yellow table runner I had ironed at dawn. He didn't even say hello, just a distracted, "Where's my gray jacket, Mara?" The one with the inside pocket. "In the hall closet," I answered. Though he was already halfway out the door, his presence chilled the air in a way I had grown used to, but not numb to. There was a distance in him lately, something tightly coiled behind his eyes. Some men grow quieter with age. Jared grew sharper, more hollow. As if he'd spent years rehearsing a confession, he still refused to speak aloud. As I set out the glasses, I watched dust motes drift through a beam of sunlight, slow, lazy, unbothered. Guests would be here soon. The house looked beautiful. The food was ready. Everything was in place. Everything except the truth. I wiped my hands on my apron and told myself, just as I had told myself for decades, that birthdays were for smiling, even if no one truly celebrated you. And so I kept preparing. Minutes away from a disaster none of them could see coming, she stepped in a second after Jared did, her shadow crossing the doorway just as his words were still hanging in the air like broken glass. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I only watched her, this woman who had walked into my birthday as if she belonged somewhere inside the story of my life. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She looked at me directly, steadily, like someone who had rehearsed this moment in private mirrors and now couldn't find a place to put her eyes. Her hands trembled before her expression did. She was maybe 10 years younger than me, dressed simply, not flashy, but there was an exhaustion in her face that told a longer story than Jared's announcement ever could. Soft lines around her mouth, a slight stiffness in her shoulders. The kind you get from years of carrying a secret that doesn't stay silent at night. Her gaze traveled over the room, the table I decorated that morning, the cake I made, the candles waiting to be lit, and then came back to me with a quiet apology buried deep inside it. Not guilt, not pride. Something in between. As if she'd spent years preparing to be hated, and yet somehow respected me too much for hate to land. Behind her, the two adult children, her children, Jared's children, shifted awkwardly, unsure where they were supposed to stand in the ruins of my birthday. But she wasn't unsure. She stood tall, protective, a mother ready to shield them from the shame she expected to come crashing through the room. And still her eyes stayed on me, like she wanted to say I'm sorry. Like she wanted to say I didn't plan this. Like she already knew I was the one person in this entire room whose heart had just been silently, neatly split open. But I didn't let her see anything. Not the sting, not the fracture, not the years collapsing inside me. I gave her the same calm, unwavering expression I had given Jared, because if she truly knew my heart would break, she was about to learn that it wouldn't break quietly. Lena was the first to move, though move is too strong a word. She simply straightened her back, as if someone had poured cold water down her spine. Her wine glass stayed frozen in her hand, the stem pressed so tightly between her fingers I thought it might snap. She didn't speak. She didn't even blink. She only stared at Jared with the same expression she used to have at 9 years old when she realized her father forgot her school recital, confused anger wrapped in a child's disappointment. Beside her, Clara stood absolutely still. My gentle one. My quiet one. She looked smaller somehow, like the truth had pushed her inward. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but the words never made it to her mouth. Her eyes drifted to me, not to him. They searched my face for direction, for understanding, for anything that could explain why their father was standing there with a stranger and 2 grown children who suddenly had their last name. But it was their silence that pierced me, not shock, not rage. Silence, a silence that said they had learned long ago that I was the stronger parent. The one who folded hurt quietly. The one who held the home together. The one who didn't fall apart, not even when she was supposed to. Lena swallowed hard, jaw tight, and looked away from Jared as if the sight of him was suddenly too unfamiliar. Clara's hand reached for mine, soft, hesitant, trembling just slightly. That tiny motion, her fingers slipping into my palm, hurt more than his entire confession, because for the first time in their lives, my daughters were seeing me not as their unshakable mother, but as a woman who had just been wounded in front of the world. For a moment, I wished they would shout, accuse him, protect me, but they didn't. They just stood there, carrying their pain the way daughters do, quietly, obediently, politely, while mine echoed inside my chest with a sharpness only a mother can feel. Their silence didn't come from weakness. It came from heartbreak. And heartbreak, when shared between a mother and her daughters, Cuts deeper than any betrayal a husband could deliver. Jared lifted his glass as if this were any ordinary birthday toast. As if he hadn't just marched another family through my front door like a prize he'd won decades ago. He cleared his throat, straightened his shoulders, and tapped the side of his glass twice. A practiced gesture. A familiar arrogance. The room, still buzzing with low chatter and soft music, slowly quieted. Guests turned toward him with polite curiosity, expecting a sentimental tribute to his wife turning 68. What they got instead was a performance. To my beautiful Mara, he began, flashing the same charming smile that once fooled me into giving up my dreams to build a life with him. She has stood by me through everything. And today, I want to be honest. Completely honest. My chest tightened, but my face didn't move. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't apologetic. He was proud. I want all of you to meet someone important, he continued, gesturing toward the woman and the 2 adult children standing behind him. This is a family I've kept private for 30 years, A murmur swept through the guests, one of those stunned ripples that travel through a room when people don't yet know whether to gasp or pretend they didn't hear correctly. He kept smiling. As a man, he said, raising his glass a little higher, you make decisions in life that shape you. And this, he pointed toward them, shaped me more than anything. Not a hint of remorse. Not a shadow of guilt. He spoke as though confessing an affair and 2 hidden children was the same as announcing a business success he was finally ready to brag about. Lena's breath caught. Clara's hand trembled in mine. But Jared? He basked in the attention. As if this betrayal were some kind of personal milestone. The guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes bouncing between his grin and my stillness, unsure which one of us they were supposed to look at. And still, he kept talking. Loving the sound of his own confession. Loving the spotlight. As if destroying a woman on her birthday was just another story he got to tell. Jared was still talking when I stepped forward quietly, deliberately cutting through the thick silence his confession had left hanging over my birthday table. He didn't notice me at first. Men like him rarely notice the woman they believe they've already defeated. I held the small wooden box carefully in both hands. Dark mahogany. Brass hinges. No ribbon. Not festive. Not warm. Not meant for celebration. It wasn't a gift. It was a mirror he would be forced to look into. Mara, he finally said, surprised to see me standing closer than he expected. You have something to say? I didn't speak. I simply extended the box toward him. Guests leaned forward. Lena took a breath she didn't release. Clara whispered, Mom, what are you doing? But I remained steady, arm outstretched, gaze steady on the man who thought he had taken every ounce of power I had left. Jared frowned, not with guilt, but curiosity. The curiosity of a man who had always assumed he controlled the narrative. What's this? He asked. Again, I didn't answer. I just waited. Silence pressed against the walls. Even the woman beside him, the one whose eyes had softened earlier, looked unsettled now. As if she felt something shifting. As if she sensed this box was not about forgiveness. Jared hesitated before taking it. His fingers brushed against mine and I felt the smallest tremor in his hand. He tried to laugh it off. You always did love dramatic moments, Mara. But the laughter died in his throat the moment he felt its weight. Heavy. Unexpectedly heavy. What's inside? He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. I stepped back, folding my hands calmly in front of me. It's yours, I said softly. You've earned it. He swallowed. For the first time that evening, uncertainty flashed across his face like a crack in polished marble. The box sat in his palms like a verdict, and he hadn't even opened it yet. Jared held the box the way a man holds something that suddenly feels far more dangerous than it. Looks, fingers rigid, knuckles whitening. Breath caught halfway in his throat. He hadn't opened it yet, but the weight of it, the silence around it, it was already working on him. And no one spoke. Not the guests. Not my daughters. Not even the woman he'd brought, whose eyes flicked between his face and the box as if watching a fuse burn. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the old ceiling fan, spinning above us like a slow, patient witness. Jared cleared his throat, but the sound cracked. A thin crack, barely there, but enough to expose something raw beneath his arrogance. What is this supposed to be? He asked, voice quieter now. Not confident. Not triumphant. Just small. You'll see. I replied. His eyes darted from the box to me, and for a moment I saw it, the realization that the script he thought he was controlling had slipped from his hands. That maybe, just maybe, I'd been standing 3 moves ahead of him all along. He set the box down on the table, but even then, he didn't release it fully. His fingertips lingered on the lid, as if he feared it might spring open on its own. Behind him, someone whispered. A guest shifted. Clara's hand found Lena's, gripping tightly. The tension coiled around all of us, slow and suffocating. Jared tried again, forcing a thin smile. If this is some symbolic thing you put together to embarrass me, Mara, I won't. But the sentence never finished, because his hand trembled. A soft, unmistakable tremor that traveled from his wrist to the edge of the lid. He wasn't scared of what was inside. He was scared that I had known more than he ever believed I was capable of knowing. His breathing quickened. His forehead dampened. And without lifting the lid even a centimeter, Jared whispered something only I could hear. You knew, didn't you? I didn't blink. I didn't move. The truth was already strangling him, and he still hadn't opened the box. The garden outside the window glowed beneath the low Charleston sun, its soft golden light brushing every rose, every fern, every pebble I'd laid with my own hands. People thought I tended that garden because I loved flowers. They never knew it was the only place where I'd taught myself how to swallow pain without choking on it. I watched Jared's shaking hands hovering over the box. But in my mind, I could feel the familiar grit of soil beneath my nails, the same soil that had held every secret I never spoke aloud. That garden had been my refuge on the days when his neglect was gentler, quieter, easier to hide. The days when he forgot anniversaries. The days he treated my silence like furniture. The days he dismissed whole parts of me with a shrug. I pruned roses instead of raising my voice. I watered ferns instead of confronting lies. I let the earth take what I couldn't hold. Lena once asked why I spent so much time out there. I told her the garden helped me breathe. I didn't tell her that it helped me grieve long before I ever had a reason big enough to justify the grief. Charleston gardens are good at keeping secrets. The humidity presses everything down, burying the truth beneath scent and green life. Even now, with Jared standing in the middle of my birthday gathering, unraveling like a poorly tied knot, I could feel that same old instinct to retreat to the soil and let it swallow the ache. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Not tonight. Tonight, the garden wasn't an escape. It was a reminder. Every blooming thing outside had grown from something broken, torn or cut back. That was how gardens survived. That was how I had survived. So when Jared looked up from the box with fear pooling in his eyes, thinking he was the only one whose world was about to change, I simply folded my hands and let the strength of that garden steady me. I had learned to swallow pain out there. But tonight, I would make him taste his own. There were nights too many to count when Jared walked through our house with the soft confidence of a man who believed his wife slept deeply and questioned nothing. He never knew how lightly I rested. He never knew how often I lay there in the dim glow of the hallway light, eyes half open, listening to the small betrayals he thought were invisible. He wasn't careless. He was comfortable. And comfort makes men bold. I remembered the way the floorboards near the study groaned under his weight at a.m. long after he claimed exhaustion from work. The way his voice softened during late-night calls, not the clipped tone he used with clients. The way he closed the door gently but didn't bother to check if the light leaked through the crack under it. He assumed I wouldn't see. He assumed I wouldn't ask. He assumed I wouldn't doubt him. Men like Jared always assume. I noticed his shirt smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't wear. The new TIs he claimed he bought on sale tags from a boutique I'd never heard of. His phone lighting up with a name saved under something harmless. E. Walker Contractor. A contractor who sent messages at midnight that made his breath hitch before he typed a reply. I didn't confront him. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to understand the shape of the truth before touching it. So I lay still, breathing slow and even, letting him think I was asleep while he moved through the darkness writing the story he thought I'd never read, and each small discovery slid into place like a piece of a puzzle I never asked for. A puzzle that eventually revealed a woman's laughter buried in his voicemail. A monthly transfer to an account he claimed was work-related. A photo cropped badly of a girl whose smile curved exactly like his. By the time he confessed tonight, with strangers at our door, my shock was long gone. Everything he revealed, I had already known, because all those nights he thought I slept, I was wide awake, collecting every truth he tried to hide. There are protections a woman builds for herself. And then there are protections a father places beneath her feet long before she realizes she'll need them. My father had been gone for 17 years, yet on this night, my ruined birthday, with Jared holding that box like a ticking truth, his presence felt closer than ever. I remembered his hands, rough from years repairing boats along the Charleston harbor, resting on mine the day he made me sign a stack of papers I didn't fully understand. One day, he told me, "You might thank me for this." At the time, I thought he worried too much. I thought I was marrying a man who would never let the ground shift under me, but fathers see things daughters can't, or won't. What Jared didn't know, what he had never known, was that every property we lived in, every account he bragged about, every asset he believed he controlled, was in my name. My father made sure of it. His last gift, his quiet shield, a fortress disguised as paperwork, and I had guarded that truth for decades. Not to hurt Jared, but because part of me still wanted to believe the man I married would never betray me. Now, watching him stand in my living room, my home unraveling in front of both families, I understood exactly what my father had saved me from. Jared thought he held the power tonight. He thought his confession would crush me, humiliate me, reduce me to something small and breakable. But the moment he opened that box and saw the documents beneath the first stack, the ones with signatures, deeds notarized, dates older than his lies, his face drained. He recognized them immediately. His name missing, mine standing alone. The room didn't see what those papers meant, but he did. For the first time, Jared wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing everything he built on top of me. My father had given me a fortress, and tonight, Jared realized he'd been living inside my walls all along. The moment Jared lifted those papers, the panic that flashed across his face didn't just belong to me. It spread slowly, like a bruise, toward the woman standing behind him. Her name, I later learned, was Elise. But in that moment, she was simply the stranger whose eyes had already begun to fill with a fear she didn't yet understand. Her 2 children, his children, stood frozen on either side of her. A boy no older than 15. A girl with Jared's exact chin. They watched every twitch of his expression, searching for answers he could no longer hide behind charm or practice half-truths. What is that?" Elise whispered, leaning forward as if the papers might rearrange themselves into something harmless. Jared didn't answer. He couldn't, because the more she read the headings, deed transfers, trust ownership, marital property designations, the more her face collapsed. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly folding in on itself, the way a person does when they've been holding onto a version of reality built entirely on someone else's convenience. "You told me you own everything," she said. "You told me you were protecting us. You said," her voice caught. "You said she didn't need anything." The children stared at him, confused, betrayed, and too old to be shielded from the truth anymore. A murmur rippled through my birthday guests, polite, horrified Southerners who suddenly wished they'd stayed home. My daughters stood stiff and silent, watching not just their father fall apart, but the quiet shattering of the world he'd created behind our backs. "I thought you were divorcing her soon," Elise said, every word tightening. "You swore it was almost done." Jared swallowed hard. I needed time." "No," she said. "You needed lies." It was right then that the air shifted. His secret family realized they weren't his future. They were his alibi. He hadn't just betrayed me for 30 years. He had betrayed them with the same breath, and now both of his worlds were collapsing at the same dinner table, under the same truth he never saw coming. Revenge, people imagine, arrives like a storm, loud, violent, impossible to ignore. Mine didn't. It came quietly, the way a root system forms underground, slow, steady, unseen until the tree finally falls. As Jared stood there, swallowing his unraveling life, I felt an almost peaceful clarity settle through me. Because nothing happening tonight was improvised. No part of this collapse belonged to luck, fury, or impulse. I built it piece by piece, detail by detail, over years of choosing observation over confrontation. While he believed I was clueless, I was documenting. While he assumed I was meek, I was preparing. While he lived two lives, I strengthened the one he thought he controlled. Every account he opened without me, I traced the statements quietly. Every asset he tried to hide, I gathered signatures, timestamps, witnesses. Every lie he told late at night thinking I was too tired, too old, too dependent to notice became a breadcrumb I collected. There was no rushing, no chaos, just patience. A kind of patience he never expected from the woman who folded his shirts and set his dinner plate across from hers. Betrayal ages a person, but it also sharpens them, refines them, distills them down to something unshakable. Tonight was simply the unveiling. As Elise and her children stood trembling, as my daughters watched the truth crest like a wave, I felt no triumph, only completion. A long, quiet journey reaching its last step. His hands shook because he recognized the structure of my plan. He recognized dates, my father's lawyer's signature, the phrases only someone deeply informed could include. Jared finally understood the scale of what I'd done. I hadn't exposed him out of anger. I had outmaneuvered him out of discipline. There was no shouting, no throwing things, no dramatic accusations, just a man realizing that the woman he underestimated for 30 years had dismantled his empire with precision and patience, piece by piece, until nothing remained standing but the truth. Jared always walked like a man who owned the ground beneath him, chin lifted, shoulders squared, a quiet arrogance woven into every step. For years, people let him keep that illusion. They nodded, laughed at his jokes, believed his stories, and accepted his self-appointed authority because he carried it with such confidence. But on my 68th birthday, as he stood in front of a room full of people who had once admired him, I watched that illusion collapse slowly at first. Then all at once, the moment he recognized the documents in the box, the color drained from his face. It was like watching a man read his own obituary while still standing upright. His bravado evaporated. His posture wilted. He looked smaller or older, almost fragile, like all those years of pretending had suddenly caught up to him. He realized in one breath that the house he bragged about wasn't his. The savings he thought he controlled weren't his. The future he promised Elise wasn't his. The admiration he demanded from our daughters would never be his again. Everything he used to build his second life, money, charm, status, had been anchored to me, to my father's protection, to the very stability he believed I existed solely to provide. He had spent decades imagining himself as the architect of our world. But in reality, he'd been living inside a structure he never owned, and now the walls were folding in. His guests looked at him differently, curiosity shifting to discomfort, then to quiet judgment. His business associates stepped back, distancing themselves as though dishonesty were contagious. Even Elise, the woman he'd assured of security and a future, stared at him with a mixture of betrayal and dawning fear. He reached for something: dignity, authority, an explanation, but his hands kept trembling. The man who once dictated every detail of our lives suddenly had nothing left to dictate. Not the house, not his image, not his narrative, not even the sympathy of the room. Control had been his identity. And now, stripped of it, he was simply a man exposed. When the last candle on the cake burned down to a quiet curl of smoke, something inside me settled gently, like dust after a long storm. Not victory, not triumph, just release. A soft, clean exhale I had been saving for 30 years without realizing it. The room was still buzzing with whispers, shocked guests gathering purses, men pretending they hadn't spent decades admiring Jared, Elise frozen in the corner while her sons avoided his eyes. My daughters stood close to me, one on each side, as though afraid I might collapse. But I didn't. I felt steadier than I had in half a lifetime. Jared tried calling my name once, quietly, almost respectfully, as though the collapse of his kingdom had taught him humility. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I had heard every tone his voice was capable of: anger, charm, manipulation, apology. None of them mattered anymore. Instead, I reached for my shawl draped over the back of the chair. It felt symbolic, light, warm, something that belonged only to me. I walked through the house slowly, letting my fingers trail over the walls I designed, the corners I shaped, the memories I built alone, though I had never admitted it. Every step felt like reclaiming my name, my life, my breath. Outside, the Charleston dusk waited with open arms, streaked in rose and gold the way it gets only twice a year. The sea breeze lifted my hair gently, almost as if telling me, "You made it." Behind me, the muffled chaos of Jared's unraveling continued, but it no longer reached me. My daughters followed quietly, not asking questions, simply understanding. The gravel crunched beneath my heels as we walked toward the gate, and for the first time in decades, I felt like Mara, not someone's wife, not someone's foundation, not someone's shadow, just myself. Finally, beautifully myself, and that was the real gift I opened on my birthday.